let's talk about learning from failure. And I really appreciate this quote. You have not failed until you quit trying. Right? Real failure only comes from not trying at all, because failing is how you grow. So let's dive into that a little bit. So what does learning from failure actually mean? Well, it is using failure as an opportunity for growth, quite simply, right? Using the times you make a mistake, using the times you get something wrong or fail, or maybe do something really poorly as a chance to learn, right? This is easier said than done, right? A lot of us don't really do that often. We actually try to avoid failing by not trying at all, which is what that quote is about, right? But as a result of not trying, we end up actually doing a lot worse and not really growing from it. So let's get a little more detailed about that. It turns out that your brain only makes new connections when you make a mistake. And what I mean by making new connections, right, if you don't know how the brain works, if you haven't talked about neurons yet, is that the way your brain communicates with itself, right, and makes you learn things is by having a bunch of connections between different things called neurons. We'll get into detail on that if you've never heard that before. But the connections are what make you better at things. These connections, and the more you have of them, are what make you learn things, remember things better. Right? And it turns out your brain is much more likely to build new connections and help you learn when you do something wrong, because your brain sort of takes note of that mistake and then builds off of that. So if you actually kind of the first time you do something get lucky and just sort of get the right answer or whatever, even if you don't know it that well, if you get that wrong answer, your brain isn't going to make any note of it. It's not going to build the connections, and you're actually much less likely to learn that thing long term. So it's really important that we understand that not only is learning from failure a habit, it's actually literally how your brain works. But of course, as a habit, it's difficult for us because we so often feel that making mistakes should be embarrassing, or admitting that we're wrong, or admitting that we failed at something should be embarrassing. And so as a result, we avoid actually learning from those failures, when really what we should be doing is spending our time really looking at those times that we did something wrong, looking at those times when something went wrong, and deciding, okay, how can I do something about that? How can I grow from it? How can I get better at that? Because again, every time you fail is actually an opportunity for your brain to literally make more connections and learn, but also for you to really think about what went wrong and how you can do it better next time so you don't repeat that mistake, right? Now, that's when failure becomes a problem, right? If you have the same exact mistake over and over and over again, that means no, you aren't learning anymore, and you certainly aren't learning from your failures. So that's when it becomes a problem. But if you have a mistake, the same mistake happened a couple times, but then you use that mistake and failure to learn from it and grow, well then you're much better off. Because the fact of the matter is, we're all going to make a whole ton of mistakes. We're going to fail a lot in our lives. And if you do not develop a habit of taking advantage and learning from those opportunities, it's going to end up in a situation where you get down on yourself and kind of quit, or don't try as hard, or something else which will keep you from being successful long term. Again, there's nobody in the world that is very successful that didn't make a whole lot of mistakes and learn from them to get to where they are. So this is a very huge habit for you all if you want to grow and improve and get better at things and be successful. So if you are trying to work on this, and again, we'll always go into much more detail on these later on. You'll practice different ways of learning from failure, and you'll have chances to reflect on it. But for now, if you're trying to think of some ways that you could start learning from failure, one of the first things is taking ownership of your mistakes. When you do something wrong, you do something poorly, you make a mistake, own it. Be responsible for it. Be honest with yourself, right? Be self-reflective. Think about what you did wrong, and then use that as a way to move on by figuring out what caused those mistakes. So once you're honest with yourself and you say, hey, I made a mistake, I failed there, then you can make that step and really figure out what caused that mistake. And then from figuring out what caused that mistake, you can make a plan for avoiding the mistake the next time. Now this goes to anything you're working on. This could be a physical thing you're trying to get better at, like throwing a baseball very well, right? Playing a sport, to what you're doing in the classroom. If I make a mistake in math, right, I need to own that mistake. I'm not going to just copy the right answer from somebody else, because then I'm not learning, right? I own the mistake. I say, hey, I got this wrong. Check in with somebody, figure out what caused you to get that wrong, and then make a plan. Like, okay, this is how I solve that problem in the future if I run into it. And I promise you, if this is the kind of mentality you take, if you develop a habit of this, you are going to be growing very fast and learning a lot and doing a lot better in the future.